You're listening to the My Thoughts, His Words podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Auerbach, and I'm joined by my friend Olia Denisuk, and we want you to join us each week as we study the Bible and share our thoughts. Let's go. Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up? I've been good. The whole week went well, so praise God for that.
Nice. Not a ton different this week. We've still been looking at houses. We went to a worship night last night though, and that was really fun. And it was a lot like what Upper Room is like. So if anybody's listening and you haven't heard of Upper Room, they just do this, like, I don't know if it's quite 24/7, but it comes from, I believe this is where it originates. It could originate from multiple scriptures, but when David brought the ark back to Jerusalem and he established this 24/7 worship with musicians, he appointed to just minister before the ark to the Lord. And so I believe that's where the idea for the 24/7 worship comes with Upper Room. And then also there's other verses that talk about never ceasing worship in heaven and all the angels and the saints that cast their crowns before the throne of God. And so just like, as on earth as it is in heaven. And so it is like scriptural, but it's really cool. So this church does worship most nights of the week. I think it's not 24/7. Obviously that would be very challenging, unless you have quite a few people on staff or that can volunteer for that. But we went to that and it was fun. It was just very similar to what you see in like a Upper Room set. So
Wow, that's powerful. I'm so glad to hear that.
yeah, I was thinking about you. I was like, man, when Olia comes back, like I want to bring her here. Like she'd love this.
Sure, sure. And I'm glad for
But
you. I'm glad for you guys.
yeah, it was so fun. And then I've had a lot of thoughts this week, just random thoughts when I think about just when I've been reading the Bible or thinking about what we should talk about on the podcast. But I want to read one thing that I read this morning and then kind of go into a different topic, but I think it's all somewhat connected. And so I was reading in 1 Corinthians this morning, and 1 Corinthians 10 says, "For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did." And I just think that's so sobering because they all had an experience with God. And so it was a miraculous experience, miraculous provision. God brought them through the Red Sea and he delivered them from Egypt. But still, it says God was not pleased with most of them. And it goes to show us that just because we have an experience with God or just because we go to church regularly, it doesn't mean that God's pleased with us. And so we need to find out what pleases God. And so it's our responsibility to know and be known by God. And we can't compare ourselves with Christians or pastors or anyone. We have to know the word of God for ourselves. And so one of the passages I want to look at is where Jesus talks about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven and how we must become like them. And that's found in Matthew. I'll flip there. In Matthew 18, it says, "At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, 'Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me.'" And I think this is what I thought about the most this week, is just like, what does it mean to be like a little child? And what is that attitude that we're supposed to take on that is childlike? What is it that God is looking for? there. And so I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that right off the bat?
Yeah, I have many thoughts. Let me collect them and say one thing at a time. So, about the passage that you read earlier in the 10th Corinthians. So, also, what came to mind is that people had the same experience as you said. They all experienced God moving among them, and they saw the miracles God did in parting the sea. And we we see a lot of God showing Himself in the Old Testament, and people knew that, they saw that, but they responded differently. As and the same way in the New Testament, when people were around Jesus when He was walking on this earth, some of them believed in Him, and some of them were questioning Him, or they made their hearts hardened.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the same situation here but different responses. And the same way, when people go to church now, we can see all different kinds of responses of that, to God's presence. And what I truly want and pray about is for people to go to church, experience God, and let them their hearts be opened to God, to His words, and let Him transform their lives. That is a huge blessing. And unless you experience that, you don't know that. Like we can talk about it a lot of times, but unless you feel that and truly experience that, that probably means not a lot.
Yeah,
So I.
when my
Mhm.
heart was hard at one point, I remember different points in my life where I can look back now and see that my heart was hardened, but I didn't think my heart was hardened. I thought I was right. I thought I was justified.
Yeah, we like to justify ourselves so often.
Uh,
but but that's so good when Holy Spirit comes, He shows what needs to be changed. But that often takes time and takes different people to remind us about this, or we need to hear word from someone. I mean, the preacher in the church, or like sometimes I scroll in the YouTube, for example, and some videos like from other churches that I don't go to, but like they post their church services, and I like see some video that speaks to me right now. And God can speak in so many ways, like through the radio, through some
Absolutely.
songs, through the book. You mentioned that He's speaking to you through the book you're reading now, and it's so good that he uses different ways. He's not just like we can't hear his voice directly. Sometimes we do we can.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say that.
Yeah, yeah, but he yeah he talks to us in different ways. So yeah,
We might not always hear a loud, tangible voice, but I think at
yeah, yeah,
times too we can hear the voice of
yeah.
God too.
Amen. That. So and talking about children and children as an example that Jesus sets, I believe there are only two places in the Bible, in the New Testament, when Jesus directly takes a child and shows that you need to be like them. And the other one place is when people were bringing children to Jesus for Him to bless them, and disciples were rebuking people, like, and didn't want them to do that. But Jesus rebuked the disciples and said that uh, allow little children come to me, because the kingdom of heaven is for of those. Um, and truly, I tell you, it's Mark 10. And truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. And like we can think, what does it mean? Like, is it about the posture of heart, or like because children have many aspects about them. They are not always obedient. I don't think we have to be like that necessarily, but
No. Well,
the
some it depends on who your father is too. And this is one thing I was thinking of, like God is our father, and some kids grow up in very loving, well taken care of homes, and they're raised and they're trained and godliness, and you see the difference in that child's behavior than a child who maybe grows up in a very unstable home or a home where there isn't godliness in that home. And sometimes those kids are just like so crazy, like so disobedient or so wild. But there are still attributes even of those children that I believe um, God says are good things. These are positive attributes. But when you see a child who, our father is God, and when you see a child who has a father in the home, a father to raise and teach them, there's so many things like you can learn from that child because they're safe and secure in their father's protection and their love. They don't worry, as opposed to maybe a child who has grown up in a really rough house or not had a stable environment. That child might be always worried or always trying to see, like, how do I take care of myself? But a child that's well taken care of, like, trusts their father's protection, and there is a sense of like order.
Yeah, and those children who were raised in love are more likely to spread that love to others and be very friendly to their neighbors or peers. And um, I think they're also more responsive to God because they saw the love of their parents. Not necessarily like that, but that could happen. Also, I think the children are very humble. They are very sincere. They are not cunning. They are like they are. And what I think God loves about being in a relationship with us, it's when we are true, when we don't hide things from Him. When Adam, yeah.
They don't even know how to lie in the beginning. Like, they're so bad at it that they'll just tell you everything, like, I did this and then I did this. Is that okay? And they know it's wrong. Like,
Mhm.
um Dylan said when I was talking to him earlier about like what does it mean to be like a child, he said they're so humble they don't even know they're humble. Like,
Mhm.
they depend on you for everything. They depend on you. Where is their food going to come from? How are they going to become clean? Like, you need to help them take a bath. You need to take them outside. If they want to go outside, they know they need an adult to take them outside or whatever it is. They're just so humble. They don't know how to do anything really for themselves. They're totally dependent on their parents.
Yesterday I was praying about dependency on God, and I realized how much I need God. I can do no good apart from Him, and that's actually what in it says in John 15. Jesus says, "I am the vine; you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing." And that's how I felt yesterday, and I wanted to God fill me again and give His Spirit like fully so that I could do His works that He prepared for me and just be so like eager to share Jesus, so in love with Him. And we desperately need Him. And as Jesus said, you can do nothing without me. So that's the reason He came, because He knew we are going to be so needy. And that's actually a good thing, to be dependent on God and make every step along with Him and come to Him in every situation that we are concerned about, and just talk to Him, sit with Him, be in His presence, and be filled by His presence and live out of Him. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
neediness sometimes gets a bad rap because when we're needy on people, it's not healthy. And we shouldn't be needy when it comes to people. We shouldn't, our happiness shouldn't be dependent on a person that we're with or like our need, but our neediness in God is actually absolutely a good thing. Like, we have to be needy and dependent on God. And I think that's something that's become really real to me too, is that we need him for everything, like every single. And this was another thing I thought about with children, is children don't know the boundaries a lot of times, like, um and most children, like if they're, again, this is like raised in kind of a somewhat stable environment, just naturally they'll ask for everything because they don't know what is possible. They don't know what they're allowed to do. They don't know what the limits are. There's just so much, so they're very curious and they ask so many questions, but they also ask about everything, like, can I go outside, can I get a snack, can I do this, can I do that? And I just thought, like, are we that needy when it comes to God, or do we just make our own plans, or are we asking him, hey, can I do this, can I go here, is this something that you'd have for me? And so, like, that's just like another thing, it comes so naturally to children, and it's really hard, like it's hard not to be proud as adults. It's hard not to think I can make that decision for myself, or why do I need to ask for permission? Because naturally our sinful nature wants to say, like, we have this under control, or we can, we can do this for ourselves, but we have to step back and make sure that we have that humble posture, or that posture of neediness and dependency on God.
Yes, children have this constant communication with parents. They're online every time. Like every question, or if they are excited about something, "Oh, mommy, look what I did." Like they're so much in connection with parents.
It's
And
so it's so constant that we've developed this thing in America called quiet time.
uh,
Do you guys have that in Ukraine?
like, could you explain more? I probably don't know.
So many parents do this, but they'll be like, oh, it's quiet time. And they have like 30 minutes of quiet time a day because the parents really need a break from their children, is like the thing. They're like, okay, go in your room, have some downtime. We all need a
Okay,
break right now.
okay.
Is there anything like that
I
with
don't
you
think
growing
so.
up?
I don't
No.
think so.
It's like it's so prevalent. Like I've heard, like I've watched a lot of kids, like babysat for a lot of kids, and it's like every kid that I babysat for, their parents had this structured quiet time. And I never really liked it because I think I'm just like, I don't know if it's what it is about me, but I'm just like, whatever. Maybe I didn't like quiet time as a kid, but I don't think we had structured quiet time like that. But I thought about this too, is like you said, they're in constant communication. And the cool thing is like, as human parents, we get tired of that. We need our kids to like go outside and play, or go have quiet time in your room so we can have a break. But God doesn't ever tire of us being in constant communication. And he doesn't ever say, like, hey, I really need quiet time because you're just draining me mentally. He wants the constant communication.
Yeah, true, very true. He loves that communication. And
Yeah.
so we can have this with God, this constant relationship communication. And even in prayer, like you can pray in your mind as you go on your way, and or drive to work, whatever, or at work, and you just thinking, how would you do this task? And God, please help me. And like it's always good to realize that he sees you, he knows what you're going through, and he is ready to help at any time.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I feel like my mom just instilled in us as kids. And one of those things that I've always been so thankful for is she always taught us, just like, don't talk to yourself. Talking to yourself doesn't do you any good. Just talk to God. Whenever you're going to talk to yourself, just direct that to God.
Mm.
And it really does make all the difference, because instead of this like internal kind of dialogue, sometimes that can get really negative in our head. But if we're directing all of that to God, it really turns into a good thing and a positive thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, what else? So also God has called us to be his children. That's also a very huge fact to realize and to grasp. And I'll read a few verses about that. John 1:12. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent or nor of human decision or husband's will, but born of God. Also Romans 8:15. The Spirit you receive does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. And this calling Abba is the most intimate way to call a father. It means like daddy. So Jesus made it possible for us to come to God and call him a father and daddy. That's huge.
Yeah, and if you've had a good relationship with your own father, your own earthly father, I think it's easy to understand. Like, my dad used to always say stuff like, what's mine is yours, or what's yours is mine. Like, we share everything, nothing's off limits. And so there wasn't like snacks hidden away that were only for my dad that I wasn't allowed to touch, or there weren't like, parts of the house where I couldn't go into because that's dad's stuff and you're not allowed to touch it. Um, and like when you think about that, like God has whatever God has is ours. Like he has things for us and we have access to all of that. And so just like if you think about being a son or being a daughter of God, it's just that we have access to everything he has for us. He's not trying to withhold anything good from us. And I know not everybody's had that earthly relationship with their father where it's been good. Some people have not they've fallen into sinful ways of life and it's been a dysfunctional, maybe you've had like more of a dysfunctional relationship with your dad where he wasn't just giving you good things. Maybe he was the reason you got into bad things because he was providing a bad way of life or whatever it was. But God is only good and the things he has for us are only good. And so I think, yeah, that's incredible just to think about being a true son or daughter of God.
Yes, and he also gives us a heritage, and we can store things in heaven, not on earth. And Jesus even said that it's better to have treasure in heaven. So I'm excited to see how it looks like.
Yeah, Ellie's like, I'm stacking it up there.
Well,
uh,
yeah, I
that's
wish.
so funny. I forget. I feel like I just heard somebody say this, and I don't know who it was, so who knows where it came from. But they were like, oh, it might have been our own pastor.
Oh,
He was like,
really?
some of the people y'all might be sitting next to, their houses might not be finished up there. They might be like under construction still, or like, he was just joking. But yeah, like we have to be thinking just in a different mindset of our treasure, our inheritance, our heritage. All of that is found in God and heaven. And the other thing I was thinking about with children is, man, they believe whatever you tell them and they have faith for the impossible. My husband always talks about when he was little, like he used to jump off the roof with just like a little bag. He'd hold it over his head. Like he had faith for the impossible. He did not believe in gravity. Just a little shopping bag. And he said I never got hurt. It was just a normal one-story roof. But he was just like a little kid, 5 or 6 years old, jumping off the roof over and over again with this bag. And as adults, we need to have faith in God for the impossible. And I think about too, I was hanging out with a younger family member. He was like maybe four at the time. And he had this coloring book and it was a Bible coloring book. And so I read him the story in the coloring book and then he colored the picture. And then later on that day, we went for a hike and we were by the creek and I had taken him hiking many times. So he knew, like I always gave him the same spiel. You don't put your fingers in your mouth if you've had them in the water. If your bottle falls in the water, you don't pick it up and drink it. That water's dirty. Because if you get river water or creek water in your mouth, like it can make you really sick. So
Hmm.
he knows this. So he picks up this log and he throws it into the water and he says, now I can drink it. And I'm thinking, like, what is he talking about? Like, and he's like acting like, now I can drink it. And he's looking at me like, is it okay? And he's getting ready to take a drink. And I said, no, it's not okay. What are you talking about? And I'm like, we don't believe in magic. Like, I think he's doing some weird, like, wizardry, like,
Hmm.
you're clean. And he starts explaining to me. It took him a while to, like, get together all the words because I don't even think he was really he might have been even younger than 4. I don't think he was really speaking in full sentences at this time. But he starts explaining to me this coloring page in the Bible story we'd read earlier. And it was about Moses when he was instructed by God to throw the piece of wood or the log into the water, and the water turned sweet, and all the Israelites drank it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that's so crazy. Like the immediate belief in that, and the immediate,
Yeah,
like, I'm going to do that and then it's going to work. And so, like, we need to just have like that kind of childlike faith where we trust God. We trust that when we obey his word, things are going to go well for us. Then I had to explain a whole nother thing. It was hard for, it's hard for like a 5-year-old to wrap their mind around certain things.
yeah,
But I was like, look, God didn't personally tell us to throw wood into the water. But it just goes to show you, like, they really will believe anything you tell them. They'll believe um, anything, like the way you instruct them. They believe it as if it's fact.
yeah. That's good posture. To believe God that He's able to do anything when we are adults. I remember when I was a kid, and for example, got sick, and my dad was praying over me, and I believed so much that the next minute, the next second, I'll just jump out of the bed and be well. So um, I remember also one story. I was planning to go hiking for 3 days or so with my friends, but I got sick, and they needed to know, am I going or not? And to the last minute, I believed that God would heal me, and I will go hiking with them. So some time in late in night, I texted my friend that, oh, I can't go. Like, it's like I waited till the last
You waited
minute
till the
to
very
go.
last minute because you were
To go.
holding out.
Yeah,
But that's okay. And like I think we mentioned it even in the last episode. Like, we don't always know the greater plan, and God isn't like just a genie in the bottle. He's not gonna just like heal us on our every whim, but we can believe for healing, and God does heal. I don't think I've told this story on the podcast, but when we were in our church, Dylan and I were in a church in Orlando as a college ministry, and I had been having some severe pain in my wrist. And at that time, I'm in ceramics class and I'm a pottery major, and I can't move my left wrist. And I go like this, and it just cracks and crunches. And like, even when I would just hold my wrist like this, it would just be in so much pain. And I also served, and this was the hand that I used to carry trays. And so I was used to like carrying really heavy things on this specific hand, and it was just constantly causing me pain. And so at this point, I'm thinking I need to change my major. I was thinking about maybe going into painting or just doing something else that wouldn't require me to use this left wrist. And we were at a conference. It was like a weekend conference that the church put on. And at the end of one of the messages, one of the guest speakers says, I want to call people up for healing because that's just one of the gifts that God's gifted me to operate in. And I didn't really want to go up, honestly. Like, I was somewhat in unbelief, somewhat just thinking, like, is this important enough for God? Like, it's just my wrists. There was just like all these internal dialogue things like keeping me from just wanting to immediately go up. And he starts calling out people's problems, and he's like, someone's got a broken leg, someone's got this in their spine, someone's got this, calling out all these very specific things. And I was like, okay, God, if he says someone's wrist, and before I could get the thought out of my head, he said someone's left wrist. And I was like, oh, well, that's me. Like, I went up there, and I, like, as soon as he prayed over it, it was gone. And never again did I have any pain in that wrist. And so, that was a time when I wasn't even in belief. I didn't even know, maybe I'd prayed over it because I did know that God, God can heal, but I was starting to kind of think, how do I solve this problem? Do I need to change my major? Do I need to do something else? So I wasn't really in total faith, but yeah, God definitely still heals, and I do think we should always have the faith for it. And if it doesn't work out, maybe he has got a greater purpose or a greater plan, but um definitely, I think always keep the faith for it. Always hold out to the last minute like you did before your hike, you know?
Yeah, it's always good to pray and expect for a healing or for a miracle from God, but it's
Yeah.
up to Him to decide whether He wants to do it. Or, as He said, He has bigger purposes than that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, also, I was thinking about our relationship to God as children, and I thought, oh, Jesus is a perfect example of a son of God. And as we are called sons and daughters, I think, like, obviously Jesus was God, but he also was a son of God. So I'll just mention some things that we can look for and look toward. So, okay, yeah, Jesus recognized his dependence on God the Father, though he also was God, and we read this in John 5:19. Very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself; he can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. So he totally depended on Father and waited for. Um, he learned a lot from the father and was doing and was speaking those things that he learned. Also, he prayed a lot and spent a lot of time with God, and we read this a lot in the Gospels. And just one example, it's Luke 6:12. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. And after this particular moment, he then chose the 12 disciples. So it was very important to pray before that important decision to make and spend time with God. And also, yeah, Jesus obviously was doing the will of the Father. And in John 4:34, my food, said Jesus, is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work. Also John 15:10, if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. So he fully kept his Father's commands, fully completed the law, and he knew his identity. So he knew who he is, where he comes from.
Hmm.
Matthew 11:27, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. So they knew each other very well, and I don't know, probably no one can know God as well as Jesus knows. And John 15:9, Jesus knew that Father loves him. As far as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. And also, Jesus knew the authority he was given. In Matthew 28:18, then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And I think that list could be prolonged and made fuller, but that's
Yeah,
all.
of course. Jesus is the perfect example. Yeah, he's the perfect example of sonship, of humility, of he is God and he is humble and he is God's son. It's just yeah, there's the list could be go on for eternity probably. But I do think it's incredible how you mentioned that Jesus was God, but he still looked to the Father and he still was dependent on the Lord and he showed that humility. He didn't come down here and say like, "Oh, I'm God and I can do whatever I want." He didn't exercise his authority like that. He was God and he could have certainly lived differently, but he lived in a perfect example of humility and love and compassion and dependency on God and also truth and sometimes um, offense. You know, this is the thing I read recently, and it said like Jesus never offended people um, out of pride. It was always like in humility. It was never Sometimes when we get upset with someone or we're trying to like prove a point, it's because of our own pride. It's because we want to show that we're right. But it was always in humility, in accordance to who God was. Only when he spoke truth did it sometimes cause people to stumble or sometimes offend some. It was never, I'm God and I'm going to exercise my authority and show you how little you are, it was never out of a prideful attitude. It was always out of love and compassion. Another thing I thought of with kids, or maybe this is more particular to babies, but I think it goes on for a while. I don't have kids, but from the little kids I've been around, seems like they always wake up happy. um, they're just immediately giggling. Like, I know the kids I've taken care of, like when you go wake them up, they're just smiling. And even sometimes when they're grumpy before you'd put them down for a nap or something, you think, oh, when they wake up, they're going to be all better because they just wake up so joyful. And I think as adults, sometimes we can lose that. We can take on this attitude of grumbling or complaining or focusing on the negative, and not waking up with a grateful heart, not waking up happy and excited for the day that God's given us. So I think that's another thing that's just important to keep. So I've been thinking about that lately because sometimes I wake up and I'm too tired. I haven't gotten enough sleep, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I could stay in bed. But really, I should just wake up happy and excited for the day.
Yeah, I also think that troubles in life, like some worries that we have, like, oh, I have to go to job and fix that and that and that, it makes us not as happy as we could be. And as Jesus said, don't be anxious about life, but don't worry about what you'll eat or drink or what will you put on, but search first the kingdom of God. And that's a good attitude to wake up and just thank God for another day that He created, for another opportunities that He'll give, and just, okay, Father, I trust you today. Please lead me on, and let's keep going.
Yeah, and we're well taken care of kids. God loves us. And when you see kids that are well taken care of, there could be things going on, but they don't even know. They don't know to have anxieties or fears or worries because their parents are protecting them. One thing one thing I'll just end with, unless you have anything else, is that um when I used to work in the preschool that I worked at, kids miss their parents. They're sad when they're not with them, like little kids. And they need their parents during that time. And when they get, when they first have to leave their parents, they're crying. They're so sad. They don't want to be without them, even for a second. Soon they realize, like, oh, it's okay because I'll be able to go back to them at the end of the day, or I'll be able to see them again soon, or something like that. But even throughout the day, if something goes wrong, the first thing they say, I want my mom, I want my dad, like that's the very first, that's their go-to. And even when something goes right, if they like do something in school, like a cool picture or a cool work or something, they're like, oh, I want to show my mom or I want to show my dad. And they're constantly talking about that. And so I just think that's another thing. Like, are we missing God when we're not with Him? Can we not wait to get back to Him? Like, just like as a children or a child can't wait to get back to their parents. Do we have that feeling? Sometimes we're like, oh God, we just can't wait to spend time with you tonight. Or, I've been consumed by the cares of life, or I've been at work all day and I can't wait to get home and get back into the Word. So yeah, we have to be like little children. It's not easy necessarily, but there's a lot of good things there that we can learn from, and that's all I got.
Yeah, also kids are proud of their parents. I think
Mm-hmm.
they can brag about, oh, my dad has such and such car, or he gave me this
Yeah.
toy, and that would be cool if we would be so proud of God as our Father. Oh, my Father, He can forgive sins for you. He
Mm-hmm.
came to save you. He He died for you, so you can live forever with Him, and that's so good.
Yeah, and kids don't know shame until they get a little bit older. Like real young kids, they don't know they should, like there's that verse that says, if you're ashamed of me before men, like I'll also be ashamed of you before my Father in heaven. And kids don't know there's anything to be ashamed about. Like they just talk about, they're free to talk about whatever they want to talk about. And there is nothing to be ashamed about with God. We shouldn't be ashamed. We should be completely unashamed. And yeah, we should brag on God like he's our like coolest dad ever, you know. But yeah, that's another thing though, is just living in a manner that's completely unashamed.
Yep, that's it for me.
All right, cool. I hope this episode has been encouraging you. I hope it encourages you to be like a little child, like a well-behaved little child. Anyways, thanks for listening, and I hope y'all enjoyed this episode. Have a great week. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like the video and hit that little bell to be notified of future podcast episodes. Thanks for listening.